The human trudged through the alien terrain, the cold wind biting at their face, leaving a metallic taste in the air. Desolation stretched in every direction, a wasteland of crumbling ruins and lifeless ground. The planet seemed abandoned long ago, yet the sense of something unseen, forgotten, clung to the air. With each step, the world felt more isolated, the sound of boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth being the only reminder of life. As the human explorer navigated the ruins, they stumbled upon something unexpected, a barely functioning escape pod. It was buried beneath debris, its surface scarred and rusted. A flickering light emitted weak signals, signs of life inside. Curiosity pulled the human closer. The hatch opened with a strained groan, revealing a scene that would pull at the deepest sense of compassion. Inside, a woman and her child lay huddled together. Their skin, an alien hue, was pallid, and their bodies, weak and emaciated, told of prolonged suffering. The child clung tightly to her mother, eyes barely open, her fragile form shaking with shallow breaths. The mother's protective arm encircled her, but she, too, teetered on the edge of collapse. They had been left here, abandoned and alone. For a moment, the human stood frozen, torn between an urge to retreat and the undeniable pull of responsibility. The woman's eyes met the human's, desperation flickered, but also a fierceness, a mother's unwavering instinct to protect. Despite her condition, the mother pulled the child closer, unwilling to trust even as the last shreds of her strength ebbed away. A brief flashback haunted the woman's gaze, a spacecraft fleeing, leaving her and her child behind. The reason? Unclear, but the sense of betrayal was heavy. Why would her own kind forsake them like this? It was a question the human had no answer to, yet it stirred something deep inside. There were choices to be made. Walk away, leave them to their fate, or intervene in a situation that wasn't their responsibility. The human's internal conflict raged for a moment. It would be easier to leave. Easier to continue their journey without the burden of two lives clinging to survival. No one would know. No one would care. But that wasn't the nature of humanity. Humans had a long history of helping even when there was no reward, no recognition, and no obvious gain. It was in moments like these, where no one was watching, that true character was revealed. Without hesitation, the human knelt by the alien woman and her child, carefully assessing their condition. They needed help, urgently. Basic supplies were pulled from the human's pack: water, nourishment, and a simple medical kit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to offer a sliver of hope. Slowly, the woman's defenses lowered, her exhaustion overcoming her initial reluctance. She allowed the human to assist her daughter first, eyes watching closely as the child weakly accepted the offered sustenance. The human's mind raced, trying to piece together their story. Clearly, the mother had been a part of something larger, something that had gone terribly wrong. Yet, despite the desperation of their situation, she had not given up on protecting her child. That unyielding determination was something the human recognized. It was a universal trait, transcending species. The need to protect the vulnerable, to offer aid even when no one else would, was deeply rooted in the human experience. The mother, though weak, gestured toward the barren land beyond, a silent explanation in her eyes. They had been left here intentionally, a cruel fate designed by others. The human understood without words. This was not an accident. Their abandonment was deliberate, a fate meant to erase them from existence. Yet, against all odds, they had survived. Their will to live had kept them alive this long, but now they needed help. As the child slowly began to recover, the human could feel a shift in the air. It was as if a bond had formed, tentative yet undeniable. The mother's initial wariness faded as she realized the human was not a threat but a potential savior. In her gaze, the human saw gratitude, mixed with an unspoken question: why? Why would someone from another world, someone with no ties to them, choose to help? The answer, though unspoken, lay in the core of humanity's values. Empathy wasn't bound by species or origin. It wasn't about gaining anything tangible in return. It was about the simple truth that life, no matter how different, deserved a chance. Compassion wasn't reserved for those who looked like you or spoke your language. It was a fundamental part of what made humans human. The ability to see past differences, to offer kindness when it was most needed, was a strength that had defined humanity for generations. The human looked at the frail alien mother and her child, now stable but still vulnerable. There was no glory here, no accolades or rewards waiting at the end of this act of mercy. But there was something far more valuable, a quiet sense of doing what was right. In this desolate place, where hope had been all but extinguished, humanity had offered a spark. This was the essence of human nature. Not the technology or the conquests, but the small, quiet moments where compassion triumphed over indifference. Where the choice to help, to extend a hand to those in need, wasn't driven by self-interest but by a deep, innate understanding that no one deserved to be abandoned. The humans stood, their decision made. They would not leave the alien woman and her daughter behind. They would survive, together. The humans' pack was lighter now, their resources stretched thin, but the weight of their decision felt right. As the winds howled outside, and the ruins creaked under the planet's harsh conditions, there was a new sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for now, the human knew they had made the right choice. Compassion wasn't a weakness. It was a strength that had brought them this far, and it would carry them further still. The first priority was stabilizing the alien mother and her child. The human, though not a doctor, had enough experience to provide the basics. Carefully, they cleaned the wounds, administered hydration, and provided sustenance from their own dwindling supplies. Every movement was slow and deliberate, as the mother watched closely, still protective, but too weak to protest. Her distrust was understandable, given her recent experience with betrayal, but she had little choice. Her daughter, barely conscious, accepted the water and food offered to her, her small hands trembling from exhaustion. The mother, after seeing her child improve, allowed herself to accept the help as well, albeit with an air of caution. Over the following hours, small gestures began to erode the barriers between them. Though language was a major obstacle, human empathy and patience bridged the gap. The human didn't rush the communication, knowing that trust, once broken, could only be rebuilt gradually. They offered warmth, shared scarce rations, and created a temporary space where the alien mother and her child could rest. The child, in her innocence, began to respond first. A tentative smile here, a small gesture of curiosity there. The mother, seeing her child's response, began to lower her defenses, if only a little. It was a small victory but a significant one. Communication remained challenging. The human tried using basic gestures, drawing crude symbols in the dust, but the alien woman's language was unfamiliar, her vocal patterns strange to human ears. Over time, they managed to exchange a few critical pieces of information. The mother shared her name, or what seemed to be her name, and pointed to the stars in a way that suggested they were not from this system. Through halting gestures and broken symbols, the human began to piece together fragments of their story. The mother had come from a war-torn planet, a world ravaged by conflict far beyond what the human had ever known. Her people had been betrayed, cast aside by their own kind in the chaos of war. She and her daughter had been abandoned during an escape mission, deemed too weak or unimportant to save. The pain of that betrayal was etched deeply into her face, and the human could feel the weight of her grief. Yet there was more to her story, something darker. The human couldn't fully understand the details, but the alien woman's desperation wasn't just for survival. There was something, or someone, she feared. Her eyes, even in their weakened state, reflected a deep, unspoken terror of being found. The daughter, on the other hand, was a symbol of hope. Though fragile and weakened, she represented something pure, untouched by the cruelty of the galaxy's war. Her small, innocent gestures reminded the human of the future, of the potential for growth and renewal despite the devastation surrounding them. The human couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, not just for their survival, but for ensuring that the child had a future free from the horrors her mother had experienced. As they began to stabilize, the environment around them grew more hostile. Food, water, and shelter were scarce on this desolate planet, and the harsh conditions made it clear that survival wouldn't be easy. The weather turned against them, with sudden storms ripping through the barren landscape, and temperatures that dipped dangerously low during the night. The humans' immediate priority was to find a way to shelter them from the elements. They scavenged what they could from the ruined structures and their own supplies, improvising a makeshift shelter that could withstand the worsening conditions. Every day presented a new challenge. The humans' supplies were running thin, and they had to ration everything. Water was their most immediate concern. They began collecting condensation from the few functioning systems they could find in the wreckage, eking out just enough to keep them alive. Food was another issue. What little the human had left was insufficient for the long term, so they ventured out, carefully exploring the planet's surface for any signs of life or vegetation. Though the landscape seemed barren, there were small creatures, resilient plants, life forms that had adapted to the planet's hostile environment. The human learned from them, using their adaptability to find creative solutions for survival. The challenges extended beyond the physical. As days passed, the human noticed mechanical failures in the equipment they had scavenged. The makeshift shelter began to show signs of wear under the constant barrage of wind and rain. But each time something broke, the human found a way to fix it, even when the tools and resources at hand seemed inadequate. It was this resourcefulness, this unyielding determination to solve problems in the face of adversity, that kept them going. When the shelter's heat system failed, they used spare parts from the escape pod to jury-rig a new one. When a piece of crucial equipment broke beyond repair, the human found a way to improvise using alien technology they barely understood. As the alien mother watched these acts of ingenuity, her skepticism began to erode. She had expected the human to give up, to abandon them as so many others had. But the human kept going, kept finding solutions when none seemed possible. It was a testament to humanity's adaptability, a trait that had allowed them to survive and thrive in even the most inhospitable environments. In the face of overwhelming odds, the human didn't despair, they adapted. The tension continued to build. The environment was unforgiving, and every day brought new dangers. There were moments when the human doubted whether they could truly protect both the mother and her child. But each time doubt crept in, they pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate task of survival. They knew that giving up wasn't an option. Not for them. Not for the fragile lives they had taken under their protection. In the quiet moments between the storms, there was a growing sense of understanding between the human and the alien family. They were from different worlds, different species, yet their struggle for survival was the same. Their fates were now intertwined, bound by the shared need to live through the relentless challenges the planet threw at them. This was humanity's strength, adaptability, resilience, the ability to face the unknown and find a way forward even when the path seemed impossible. It was a quality that had allowed humans to conquer their own world's harshest environments, to push through adversity where others would falter. In this moment, on this desolate planet, it became clear that the human wasn't just surviving, they were thriving, turning each obstacle into an opportunity to grow stronger. And as the human worked tirelessly to ensure their continued survival, the alien mother and child began to see them not just as a rescuer, but as an ally. The fragile peace they had managed to carve out was shattered the moment a new presence arrived on the planet. The human had sensed something was wrong before they saw them, an eerie stillness in the air, a coldness that had nothing to do with the planet's weather. And then, far on the horizon, the unmistakable outline of an incoming ship. The human's instincts kicked in immediately, every sense alert. This wasn't a random passerby or rescue mission. The ship was sleek, predatory, and it moved with purpose. Whoever they were here for the alien woman and her daughter. The mother's reaction was instant, her expression shifting from exhaustion to sheer terror. She gestured frantically, her eyes wide, as if to say they had to hide, to flee. The human didn't need a translator to understand, they were in grave danger. The threat was more immediate than anything the hostile environment had thrown at them. There was no time for hesitation. Gathering what little they had, the human and the alien family began their escape, weaving through the ruins in a desperate attempt to stay out of sight. The hostile faction was fast, their technology far superior. They landed quickly, their soldiers fanning out in a tight formation. The human could hear the sharp, mechanical sounds of their equipment as they scanned the terrain, searching for any sign of their quarry. The alien woman, clutching her daughter tightly, moved as silently as she could, but the fear was palpable. The human felt the weight of their survival on their shoulders. This wasn't just about staying alive anymore, there was something much bigger at play. As they moved further into the ruins, trying to stay one step ahead of their pursuers, the alien woman finally broke her silence. Through hurried, fragmented communication, she revealed the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface since the moment they met. She hadn't just been abandoned by her people out of cruelty or neglect. There was a far more sinister reason behind it. Her people had seen her and her daughter as a liability, not just because they were weak or helpless, but because they carried something dangerous, something that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The mother explained that she had once been part of a scientific project, one that had gone far beyond the boundaries of ethical exploration. Her people had been desperate, engaged in a war that had ravaged their world, and in their desperation, they had begun to experiment with technologies and biological enhancements that crossed every line. The project she had been involved in had uncovered something powerful, something uncontrollable. And she, along with her daughter, had become the key to that secret. Her daughter was special, genetically altered in a way that made her both a symbol of hope and a potential weapon. The child carried within her the potential to cure a galactic plague, a disease that had spread across multiple systems, threatening countless lives. But this cure came at a cost. The alteration that had made her capable of saving others also made her a target. There were factions, like the ones now hunting them, that wanted to capture the child, not to save the galaxy, but to control the cure for their own gain. It all made sense now. The reason they had been left to die wasn't just neglect, it was a calculated decision. Her people had been terrified of what they had created and feared the consequences of allowing the child to live. Abandoning them was seen as the safest option, a way to erase the mistake without facing the moral implications. But now, the human understood the stakes. This wasn't just about two lives. This was about power, control, and the fate of entire civilizations. As the truth sunk in, the human felt a surge of anger. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. To think that a child, innocent and unaware of the chaos surrounding her, could be seen as a pawn in a galactic power struggle was sickening. And the mother, betrayed by her own people, hunted for the very thing she had no control over, deserved better. They both did. The human made a choice in that moment, a decision that solidified the bond between them. They would not run anymore. They would not abandon this woman and her daughter to their fate. The human had faced danger before, but this was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about standing up for what was right. No one deserved to be treated as expendable, especially not for the sake of power. Loyalty wasn't just a word, it was a promise, a commitment to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The human wasn't a soldier, but they knew how to survive, and more importantly, they knew how to protect. As the hostile faction closed in, the human formulated a plan. They couldn't outgun these invaders, but they could outthink them. The ruins offered countless hiding places, and with a bit of strategy, they could create enough confusion to buy themselves time. The human's mind raced, calculating the best routes, the quickest ways to move through the crumbling structures without being seen. The mother and daughter followed, trusting in the human's ability to keep them safe. The standoff came quickly, the tension palpable as the hostile aliens finally spotted their prey. But the human didn't flinch. They stood their ground, shielding the mother and her child, ready to do whatever it took to ensure their safety. The alien soldiers, realizing they were dealing with more than just helpless fugitives, hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, the human struck, using the environment to their advantage, outmaneuvering the soldiers with calculated precision. It wasn't about brute force. It was about using every available resource to turn the tide. As the battle wore on, it became clear that the human wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something far greater. The mother, seeing the lengths the human was willing to go to protect them, began to trust fully, realizing that they were no longer alone in this fight. This human, someone who had no reason to care, had chosen to stand with them, to fight for their right to exist. And that meant everything. In the end, it wasn't just the humans' skills or quick thinking that won the day. It was their loyalty, their unwillingness to let anyone be abandoned, no matter the odds. The hostile faction retreated, their mission failed, and for the first time in a long time, the alien mother and her daughter felt hope. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were part of something bigger. And with the human by their side, they knew they had a chance, both to live and to change the galaxy for the better. As the last of the alien faction closed in, it became clear that this final confrontation would determine everything. The human had already outmaneuvered them before, but now they were coming in full force, determined to finish what they had started. There was no option for retreat. This was where they had to make their stand. The tension hung in the air, and the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. The alien mother, despite her fear, gathered what strength she had left, preparing to fight alongside the human. Her daughter, though still young and fragile, clung to her mother, aware that their fate rested on this one last effort. The human knew that brute strength alone wouldn't win the day. These enemies were well equipped, their technology far more advanced, but what they lacked was something more fundamental, an understanding of human ingenuity and resilience. They had underestimated the human's ability to adapt, to find solutions even when the odds seemed impossible. The human's mind raced, analyzing the situation, looking for any advantage the terrain or environment could offer. Every rock, every ruin, every piece of debris could be turned into a tool for survival. As the first wave of attackers approached, the humans set their plan into motion. Using the cover of the ruins, they laid traps, creating diversions that slowed the enemy's advance. It wasn't about fighting them head-on. It was about using their own arrogance against them. The human had learned to anticipate their movements, knowing that they would charge in, expecting an easy victory. But what they encountered was a carefully crafted defense, one that forced them into tight spaces, disoriented them, and broke their formation. In the heat of battle, the alien mother's resilience became apparent. Though physically weakened, her determination and fierce protective instincts gave her strength. She fought alongside the human, using her knowledge of her people's technology to disable key weapons and disrupt their communications. It was a perfect synergy, where the human's tactical skills and bravery provided the structure. Her ingenuity and deep understanding of the enemy's weaknesses tipped the scales in their favor. They weren't just two individuals fighting for survival anymore. They had become a team, united by a shared purpose. In the midst of the chaos, there came a moment that would define everything. The attackers closed in on the child, recognizing her as the key to the galactic power they sought. For a brief second, it seemed as though all would be lost. But then, the human acted without hesitation, throwing themselves in harm's way to shield the child from an incoming blast. It was a selfless act, one that could have ended in sacrifice, but it was driven by something more than a survival instinct. It was about ensuring that this innocent life, one that carried the hope of an entire galaxy, would be protected at all costs. The attack that should have claimed the human's life was thwarted by a last-minute adjustment, a final stroke of tactical brilliance. Though injured, the human remained standing, bloodied but unbroken. In that moment, something changed between them all. The alien mother, who had once viewed the human as a mere outsider, now saw them as something more, a protector, a friend, and perhaps even a family member. The bond that had begun to form was now cemented, not through words but through actions. The human had shown, in the most profound way possible, that no one would be left behind, no one would be abandoned. They were in this together. With renewed strength, the final wave of attackers was driven back. The human, despite their injuries, continued to lead, directing the alien mother and using the last of their resources to dismantle the enemy's strategy. It was a battle of endurance, and while the enemies were technologically superior, they lacked the grit and determination that fueled the human and the alien family. Slowly, one by one, the remaining attackers were neutralized, their threat extinguished. When the dust settled, and the silence of victory replaced the sounds of battle, the human and the alien mother stood together, bruised and exhausted, but alive. The threat had been neutralized, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the alien mother and her daughter were safe. The human, despite the pain and exhaustion, smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of relief, knowing that they had kept their promise, to protect, to stand by those who had no one else. As they began to gather themselves, the alien mother looked at the human, her eyes filled with gratitude. Her perception of humanity had shifted entirely. No longer did she see them as just another species in the galaxy, driven by their own self-interest. Instead, she saw them as something more, beings capable of deep empathy, of selflessness, and of a loyalty that extended beyond bloodlines and borders. The human had fought not just for themselves, but for something far greater, a belief that every life had value, and that no one deserved to be left behind in the darkness. With the danger behind them, the human helped the alien mother and her daughter prepare to leave the planet. The bond they had formed, forged in the fires of survival, had grown into something like family. Though from different worlds, different species, they had come to understand one another in a way that transcended words. They weren't just survivors, they were now allies, united by their shared experiences and the mutual trust they had built. As they left the planet together, there was a sense of hope in the air. The human had shown that even in the darkest of circumstances, compassion and unity could prevail. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of conflicts and power struggles, but there was also the potential for something better. The human had proven that the strength of their species wasn't in their weapons or their technology, but in their ability to connect, to protect, and to inspire others to be better. This was the final triumph of humanity, not in conquering enemies, but in the simple act of standing up for what was right. In the face of adversity, the human had shown that empathy and resilience were their greatest weapons. They had led by example, proving that even in a galaxy filled with division and darkness, there was always room for compassion, for hope, and for the belief that together, they could build something greater. In the end, the alien mother saw humanity not just as survivors, but as leaders, capable of guiding others through the storms that lay ahead. As they ventured into the unknown, the human and their new family knew that they had made a difference. And in that moment, they realized that the true strength of humanity wasn't in their ability to survive, but in their ability to lift others up, to protect, and to unite in the face of impossible odds.